Everyone, George here, the Disney Family Man, coming to you with another exciting video. And I tell you what, we got a great one today because it's a whole bunch of information coming at you. I have two good friends of mine joining me for this discussion, and I'm going to introduce them to you right now. Joining me is my very dear friend and friend of the channel, OrangeGrove55. Thanks again for joining me once again for another in-depth Disney discussion.
Thanks for having me, George. Appreciate it, brother.
Always welcome back. And new to the channel is I've actually been on with him once before, and it was a great conversation. I'm glad to have him finally on the channel. We have VashSky. Hey, Vash, how you doing?
Hey there. Good to be here and excited to get into it. We got a lot to get into.
Absolutely. And since you're new to this channel, do you want to give the listeners where they could find you for any information?
Absolutely. Best place to find me is on Twitter at VashSky. That's V as in Victor, ASHSKY. Best place to find me and interact with me. I might be uploading some content on Orange Grove's channel in the future too. So awesome. Best places to find me.
Perfect. And Orange Grove, as usual, give them your info as well.
Yeah, you can find me on YouTube, OrangeGrove55. I do videos like usually about once or twice a week, all about the parks, movies, the streaming service, everything Disney related pretty much. So yeah, check me out, OrangeGrove55.
Sounds good. All right, so now let's just get into this because this is very exciting. So we're going to start this off. This vid is all going to be about Disneyland. And I think now more than ever, Disneyland is the little park that could. And it's like now coming out from underneath the sand, out of the shadows. It's starting to get some sunlight back into that area. And it's now, guaranteed that Disneyland is going to reopen on April 30th of this year. And I'm for sure everyone and their grandmother is waiting to be lining up outside the gates, ready to enter back in because it's been over a year. And so let me just start by there. What are your guys' initial thoughts just on that notion alone, that Disneyland officially has an opening date? So I'll start with you, Vash.
Oh, okay. There. I'm extremely excited. I mean, it does come with some caveats, right? That some things might not be available, some restaurants might not be accessible, some portions of the Disneyland experience might be reduced, but I think everybody's just so gung-ho about getting Disneyland back in their life that I think they'll accept almost anything at this point. And a reduced Disneyland experience is still Disneyland. And I think they'll pull it off well. I think the cast members are really excited to be back, and we're excited to see them again and have them working. I think everybody involved is really excited about it returning in some form, even though it's not 100%. I think they'll pull it off quite nicely.
Well said. Definitely, I agree. And Orange Grove, I know you're excited that it's there's finally a date, because I mean, like, we've been talking tremendously about it, of saying, oh yeah, it's going to open in July, oh it'll be open in August. Well, as time was ticking on, it wasn't going anywhere, so have an official date.
Yeah, no, it's great to have an official date, and really more so than just like personally missing the parks. I'm glad that they're finally opening again, because it kind of stops the bleeding financially, and when you stop the bleeding, you can start to heal and bring things back. It's good for these parks. It was really concerning for a long time there when we didn't have an opening date, and it was just, month after month after month after month. And I mean, I know a lot of people kind of want to blow it off like, oh, Disney is a massive company, they'll just weather anything. But I mean, everything has a threshold. And, there was a very real possibility that these parks would be permanently damaged due to the shutdowns and everything. And I'm glad to just see it, the light at the end of the tunnel now, where things can start to get back and start to recover from the major losses.
Absolutely. Now, is everything, as far as we know right now, is there anything that's not reopening when the resort reopens? Like, as far as like within the parks themselves?
I don't know if we have. Do we have a full comprehensive list of what's going to be open, what's not open? I know our future discussion will have us deep dive into Blue Bayou, and indications suggest that Blue Bayou might not be open on opening day. At least that I know. There's been some discussion about there's a 15-minute limit on attractions, and what does that technically constitute? Because they want all queuing to be on the outside. So is there any queuing at all to be had on the inside? If there's no queuing at all on indoor portions of attractions, show buildings, and the like, then that gets complicated. And if it's 15 minutes, I mean, that rides up to several attractions. But as we know, Rise of Resistance is, I think, like 25 minutes from stem to stern. So what happens there? Because the actual attraction ride portion itself is maybe 6 minutes, 7 minutes, and so.
If they do include Rise of the Resistance more so, then they would cut the pre-show, I would assume, and just go right into the breakout, so to speak.
I guess, but you would have to. My guess is that you'd have to have all of those doors open, and there's no easy bypass from the turntable sequence, the shuttle sequence. Right, because it is a turntable, and you can't have straight through access through there. So you have to go through the back. There's a back access way to where you exit the Ray room, you go outside, and I think instead of going into the shuttle, you turn left, go all the way down the corridor, and there's an access point where you can go right into the Star Destroyer. There are ways to do it. It just gets really, really complicated and does degrade the experience heavily.
Now, let me ask you this. When you had mentioned about being outside for, because there's not going to be no lining up inside, what does that constitute as far as inside? Like, for instance, like the Incredicoaster. Is that still considered as being outside, even though it's like under a pavilion type as far as going in the line goes?
I believe they would look at Incredicoaster as more of a shade structure, not an enclosed facility. They're really looking at, as far as I can tell, the differences between indoor and outdoor would be all four walls and a ceiling, whereas outdoor would be anything that didn't have those qualities. So I think a Incredicoaster is fine. I think a lot of I should say a lot of Disney California Adventure is fine. But there are some issues. I think the easiest way to kind of think of it would be something like Mr. Toad's, right? Mr. Toad's has a definite outdoor portion to its queue and a definite indoor portion to its queue. Once you get inside Toad Hall, I think we could all kind of agree that's inside. And they want no queuing at all inside there. Which means, okay, so do we let people in, like in groups of two? They walk all the way over to get on a ride vehicle, and then once they actually sit down, can we let somebody else go? Do we do it by dispatch time? So dispatch time on something like Toad is, I think, 5-6 seconds or something. I mean, it's pretty quick. Do we let that amount of people go through? It gets complicated when you think of it in those terms. The guidelines are pretty clear, though. No queuing indoors whatsoever. They want all queues to be outside. Now that's already been accomplished for, with things like Indiana Jones Adventure and Space Mountain, for example. Right? They've moved a lot of that queue outdoors already. The question is, though, we know that they let portions of it inside, and there is queue inside. How do you handle that if you can't queue anybody at all? It gets particularly interesting.
It does, and it also kind of it solves one problem, but it creates another problem. And what I mean by that is like when you eliminate the indoor queue, right, and then you have everyone outside. Well, now you're crowding the outside areas. So now you're creating a crowd outside. So it's kind of like one problem solved, another created, because, Mr. Toad, it gets pretty tight in those little walkways around the carousel and all that. And to have everyone outside is going to create a major bottleneck in that area, which is also kind of,
Well, I think just Disneyland's Fantasyland in general would be bottlenecked because everything is run almost like a central hub, sort of like how Main Street is, where you have everything surrounding. Like you have Snow White's Scary Adventures, you have Pinocchio's Daring Journey, Mr. Toad, Peter Pan's Flight. So majority of those, as you mentioned, where it starts outside but then eventually moves inside. So if they keep everyone outside, you're going to have a literal a circle of people not even knowing which line they're in.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that's why it's crucial that they limit capacity to try to limit that phenomenon from happening as much as possible. Because we've seen Fantasyland, it gets, if you have those queues backed up, it gets really bad. And then when you factor in social distancing, to have people 6 feet apart, you could have queues stretch extremely quickly, even with reduced capacity. So the management in Fantasyland is going to be particularly troublesome, I think.
Yeah, I think that's where they're probably going to have to rehire a lot of the cast members to go back and just to stand outside and do crowd control of, keeping one line separated from another, if that's the route that they're going.
Yeah, and you could literally have two-way traffic in those areas too.
Yeah. Now, let me ask you this, because I'm not too familiar. I'm just going by of articles that I have read. I don't know if it's true exactly or how much of it is, if a lot of it is more, added on to it. But they had said that as far as like with roller coasters and thrill rides, to reduce or no screaming while on the attractions. Is that actually true? Is that more exaggeration, or is that coming? Because I've read an article that Disneyland fully backs up that notion. So, what's your take on it?
Well, I heard that I'm hearing what you heard as well, George, where people were saying they're going to ban screaming, but I think it was debunked. I believe what they're doing is they're requiring you to wear a mask on those coasters because the screaming, I guess you can spread the disease that way. So they're requiring a mask to mitigate the spread. But I don't think they're banning screaming. I just think they're requiring you to wear a mask that will mitigate the spread when you scream, is my understanding of it. But I could be wrong. Have you heard anything different, Dre, or what have you heard?
From what I understand, these weren't actually state guidelines that were issued. These were, there's like a consortium of theme parks that have kind of an association, and they put out suggested guidelines as if to say, this is what we suggest to do. I don't know. I haven't heard anything. I've tried to look it up, and I can't find anything that solidifies Disney's position one way or another, quite frankly. But I have seen nothing to suggest that Disney is, backing that, is 100% on board with that idea. The problem is enforcement.
Exactly.
How do you enforce something like that? Maybe in Credit Coaster, but then that's a train of 18 long, and that gets extremely messy. Space Mountain, really? I don't know how you go about enforcing that at all. They could suggest it, but it's still going to happen.
Exactly. It's going to happen. I think if that's really the requirement for them, where they were going to ban screaming, I think that Disney would probably opt to not open the attraction at all. Because like Dre said, he hit the nail on the head. It's impossible to enforce. And what are you going to do? If someone screams, are they going to ban them from the park when they get off the ride, or what's going to be the punishment? I guess if you do.
When I first saw that initial article, I'm thinking, I don't know how in the world, even if this was to come to fruition, how it would ever play out. So I think at Orange Grove, what you were saying was, it was pretty much Disney just agreeing to the state guidelines of wearing the mask, just as all the other theme parks have agreed to, and someone kind of twisted it around of saying, okay, no screaming, kind of like muzzling the face, so to speak, of wearing a mask, and then it just got blown up to saying, okay, no screaming, because a lot of times, even just with article titles, they could be misleading. And then as you read the article, it's like, well, this has nothing to do with the title.
Right.
Yeah, I just think it's a daisy chain of of inaccurate facts kind of parroted once after the other, and you get away from the actual substance of it, which was much more nuanced than what is being suggested on the other end.
And to be quite honest with you, if they were to ban screaming, it would destroy the Monstropolis economy, and I don't think Disney wants to do that.
I mean, it took them this long to reopen, so then to have to reopen and say, okay, no screaming, no laughing, no joy at Disneyland.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, that makes particularly bad headlines, I'm sure.
So now moving from the attractions on to now the restaurant portions, that they said that a lot of restaurants are now going to be reopening with Disneyland. And we got even more news on top of that there's going to be added alcohol added into these restaurants. So I think that's just Disney's way of saying, these people waited so long, we have to give them booze.
It's a stressful time. We got to give them more.
Drink away your sorrows. That's funny. That's hilarious. Yeah, well, this has been coming down the pike for quite some time. I know, starting with the kind of Galaxy's Edge development, that Project Stardust type era for the Disney parks. I know there were lots of discussions within Team Disney Anaheim about the possibility of expanding alcohol outside of Club 33. And what was the intention, from what I understand, was that with Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, it wasn't just going to be Oga's Cantina, but it was also going to be the restaurant complex that Oga's Cantina was simply going to be the lounge for. It was going to be both those facilities that were going to have an alcohol license and actually serve alcohol to guests. From once the restaurant got, it didn't make the cut, and once things started changing around, it was, well, let's just focus on opening Star Wars Galaxy's Edge to the best of our abilities and not roll out an alcohol program throughout the entire park. But that was supposed to be, the restaurant was supposed to be kind of a first venue, and then other venues to follow shortly thereafter. And I think that's what we're seeing with Blue Bayou. I think this is one of the first. This is going to be the first restaurant that you're going to see, and I think it's taking a familiar path that we saw in Magic Kingdom, where you can't get alcohol in all venues, no matter what, and they have ODV carts serving alcohol on the sides. It's going to be very limited to certain specific locations, certain upscale dining venues, and according to this MyShed article, they are going to limit it to 2 drinks max.
Cool. Yeah, I'm supportive of this decision. I've always been okay with alcohol at the Disney parks for a number of reasons. I mean, I think that Disney does a good job at kind of managing it. I mean, this is an anecdotal thing. I mean, it's my personal experience, but DCA has had alcohol for years. I mean, since it opened, and I haven't personally seen a whole lot of alcohol-related incidents, at least from my experience, and I feel like the cast members do a really good job at just kind of handling that. A lot of fans, point to, Walt Disney, stating he didn't want alcohol in his parks. But the thing with that is I think that society changes and the times change. And I think the park needs to reflect that to some degree. Like we've seen a ban on smoking, recently at the parks, which in 1955, when the park opened, Walt had no problem with smoking, but that's changed. I think this is just an evolution, and I'm okay with it. And as long as Disney manages it properly, or it doesn't get out of control, and like you guys were saying, how it's in the sit-down restaurants, it's done in a respectful way, I'm all for it. I see nothing wrong with it at all.
Yeah, I'm right there with you guys. I think as long as Disney does it tastefully, like how they've done at Walt Disney World, because for the longest time, the only place that, as far as I've known, was Epcot that you could get alcohol, especially during like the International Food and Wine Festival and what have you. But then when they announced alcohol at the Magic Kingdom, that you could now be served alcohol at the Be Our Guest restaurant, it was like everyone just kind of went kerfluffled that it was Yeah, that it was like that. We're going to be seeing people walking around with beer distributing hats on, like drinking it through a straw, walking through the park, and it's like, no, you only get the alcohol at the designated areas, and you cannot take the alcohol outside. And I think it just became more adaptable, that where it's like no one even blinks an eyelash anymore at it. So I think if it's good for Walt Disney World, it'd be good for Disneyland. And I also think it's a good way to kind of promote these restaurants to reopen again, because with them being closed for so long, it'll draw more of an attention to say, oh, well, I could have an alcoholic beverage with my dinner if we have reservations or what have you. So I think it definitely helps the restaurants out as well.
I do actually agree. To provide some historical context, I know, Walt was very much a stickler for, hey, look, we've got to have a clean park with a clientele that doesn't, that isn't rowdy, that isn't profane, that is kind of, it matches the criteria in the park in terms of cleanliness and lack of degeneracy. But I think, and his big concern was the kind of seaside pier amusement park where people, you would have, especially younger ones, kind of drink themselves past probably the point that they should be. And he was very concerned about that. But honestly, we while there are encounters of that within other parks, maybe Epcot and Disney California Adventure, they're handled quite well, generally speaking. There have been a few notable incidents, but generally speaking, it is handled quite well, and the perception around it, the kind of the cultural aspect to it, in a larger context, has completely changed around it, and I think Disney is being responsible with it. They're only placing it at certain venues where an adult beverage might be appropriate, and they are limiting how much alcohol can be consumed right at the gate. And I think all those things combined, I think, provide for an actual enhanced experience when it comes to Disneyland, rather than a reduced experience by not having it.
Yeah, and plus, I actually really love the creativity that goes into some of these drinks, like the Mickey's Fun Wheel over at the former Cove Bar and stuff, where it's like, rainbow color layers, and there's a lot of creativity and fun things they do with these drinks. And like you said, Dre, it totally adds to the experience in a lot of ways.
And especially if you have your 2-drink max, and then you go on Mickey's Fun Wheel, you won't have to go on the swinging car one. You could just go on the regular one, and they all become the swinging cars.
That's the only way I'll get on that ride. I don't think I've only been on the Mickey's Fun Wheel like twice, and both times I had a drink before I went on it. I can't go on that sober. It's too terrifying.
So we're not calling it by its actual name of Pixar Pal Around. We're just going to be calling it Mickey's Fun Wheel, guys. Come on. No, I don't like the swinging ones at all. I'll keep the standard. They also, if you look, the swinging ones don't, they don't have as much height to them when you get up to the top there. So, if you're going to do it, let's do it properly.
Right? Yeah.
So did they give like a full list of the restaurants that will have the alcohol, or is it just the Blue Bayou, and did it mention
I think they're starting out with the Blue Bayou first. I wouldn't be surprised if you see restaurants in the future get this. I know there was some talk about getting maybe a Beast's Castle restaurant in Disneyland for a little bit there. I don't know if that's still on the table or not, but I would expect that to have alcohol. I'd expect a River Belle Terrace and Cafe Orleans to also maybe have an alcohol portion to their menus at some point. But, that's really the extent of it. I don't really see it going past that point. Venues like Golden Horseshoe or what is it? The Hungry Bear restaurant and Tomorrowland Terrace. I just don't see those venues being added. I really see it being limited to only table service options.
Right. Yeah, me too. Same here. I completely, agree with you. And, it's funny because Disneyland Resort is a very compact, small experience where it never really made sense to me. Like, they're going to ban it at California Adventure, but not at Disneyland, as if if you drink at California Adventure, suddenly your buzz goes away when you walk 10 feet and go to Disneyland. I mean, you're still drunk. I mean, you know what I'm saying? There comes a point where it's kind of just like semantics. You know, I mean, they've already allowed it at DCA. It's time just to open it up at Disneyland.
I think so. I agree with that statement.